Hello everyone, and once again a warm welcome back to the Dr. Embalmer channel. As you might have noticed, there are two videos of the final push for the GTX 950. One of the videos is targeted at Firestrike, and the second one at Timespy. And as I promised in the Timespy video, we would try to summarize our findings and achievements in a separate video, and I would create some charts and see if we can draw some conclusions and stuff like that. So that's exactly what I thought what we should do today. And to start off, I thought that let's have a look at Firestrike. So just as a reminder, we're running, or we have been running, GTX 950, and the CPU has been an AMD A10 7850K, and we have overclocked the system as well as the GPU. So the results in percentages might be a bit larger for GTX 950 than we might see in the future for other GPUs that we might test, because we have overclocked the system as well outside of the GPU. And now that we have found the limits for the system itself, when we, for instance, switch to a GTX 960, then we only have the GPU to play with, so to speak. So we're already starting at, our starting point is with a system that's overclocked to its limits, more or less. While the GTX 950, we have included the system overclocking as well in the results. Anyway, just to keep that in mind, and also before we dive deeper into the chart, the max power limit is 120% on all bench tests except stock. And yeah, so I created this chart with a few bars, and I have prepared for a GTX 960 because, as I mentioned, I feel a lot like getting a 960 and see how that will compare. And what kind of achievements and rankings we can get to reach on Firestrike and Timespy. So just as a reminder, we did find the we did get to the top scores in Firestrike and Timespy for the CPU GPU combination, which is great. So I'm a lot inclined at trying to repeat the same process for a GTX 960. Anyway, so at the moment we only have data for GTX 950, but I have prepared for this 960. And we can see that the GPU offset, we got to a value of 215 megahertz on the core, and 880 on the memory, on the VRAM. And this is for Firestrike, just to be clear. If we compare the overall score, we increased from our stock run at 5140 to 6014 on our sort of the end score, our final score, which is not really 1000 points, but almost 900 points, right? And that's not bad. We sort of overclocked ourselves into the GTX 960 stock territory, I believe, at least. The graphics score increased from 6446 to 7706. That's a decent jump, I believe that's the largest jump, maybe. We shall have a look at that. Of these scores, the physics score increased from 4,977 to 5,498. That's mainly attributable to the system overclocking, I suspect. And we did start off with slightly overclocked system at the start of things. I believe the CPU was at about 4.4 gigahertz, maybe 4.2, 4.4. I don't really remember. But anyway, so we did have a 500-point increase or so. And then the combined score increased from 2081 to 2400 even. So that's pretty much as well. 400 points, almost 300 points out of 2000. So that's 15% or something, right? Maybe. So let's have a look at some absolute values. So the differences from the stock run for the overall score was 874 points, graphics score 1260 points, physics score 521, and combined score 319. And it will be very interesting to compare that to the GTX 960 later. So look forward to that. Yeah, so and then we also have a chart here with the percentages. So the overall score increased by 17%, and that's not bad at all. The graphics score increased by 19.5%, and I mean that's pretty decent for a GTX 950 with a maximum limit of the power limit at 120%, and we don't have any no real options of voltage control to the GPU core and stuff like that. So that's pretty neat, actually. The physics score increased by 10.5%, and this is mostly the system overclock outside of the GPU itself. And since we already had a slightly overclocked system, 10.5% is pretty good as well. And then the combined score, 15.3% uplift. So yeah, pretty good actually. And I really look forward to comparing these figures with the GTX 960 later. So my fingers are itching to try that out soon. So stay tuned. Okay, let's have a look at Timespy now. So if we now instead have a look at the Timespy results and achievements, what will we find then? Well, as it turns out, the numbers are pretty closely matched actually to Firestrike. But let's first look at the Timespy results alone. So for Timespy to achieve stability and decent runs, we have slightly lower offsets on the GPU and VRAM, and also on the total system overclock. But we have now BIOS presets available for the system, so that we can for Timespy and Firestrike, so we know we can use the same settings for other GPUs. But yeah, like I said, the GPUs itself couldn't run at the same core and memory offsets to get to stability in Timespy. so we might see slightly lower achieved values here. Nevertheless, the GPU offset on the core 195 megahertz, and on the VRAM 850. The overall score increased from 1865 to 2174, graphics score from 1848 to 2177, and CPU score from 1974 to 2162. And that means a 309 megahertz uplift on the overall score, not megahertz, but a 309 point score increase, 329 for graphics, and 188 for CPU. If we translate that into percentages, we can see that the overall score increased by 16.6%, and if we compare that to Firestrike, overall score increased by 17% on Firestrike and 16.6 for Timespy. So it's pretty much within error, I would say. They're sort of equivalent. The graphics score in Timespy increased by 17.8, and in Firestrike 19.5. So it's a couple of percentage points, maybe, but still pretty solidly. I mean, the difference isn't huge. It's not like you got 10% in Timespy and 19.5 in Firestrike, so we're pretty good there. CPU score 9.5%, and in Firestrike I suspect that would be comparable to physics score at 10.5%. So yeah. And what conclusions can we draw then? Well, I would say that we have fared pretty well, actually. We did achieve the highest score for the CPU-GPU combination on both Firestrike and Timespy. We did manage to increase the scores quite a bit from the stock run, especially graphics score, which is what we're looking for when we are testing GPUs. So 17.8% in Timespy and 19.5 in Firestrike, and that's without any modifications to the VBIOS or anything like that. I did have a look at TechPowerUp website, but I didn't find any modded BIOS for this GTX 950. And depending on the GTX 960 that I can get hold of, we'll see if we can maybe include a BIOS flashing there. So if we can find a matching BIOS that would enable us to increase the power limit or something like that additionally. So yeah, and yeah, I'm pretty pleased actually with the results here. I don't know if there's much else to say than a huge thank you. I see that we're now 22 subscribers on this channel, and huge thank you to all of you. And I'm happy that we can explore many different areas, everything from overclocking and benchmarking to fun electronics projects, and finding interesting things like flashlights and battery chargers, and yeah, pretty much everything that comes to mind that's interesting. So yeah, and like I said, keep your eyes open for some upcoming GTX 960 content, and that will be very interesting to see how we fare there. So yeah, that's it for this video. A lot shorter than one might expect from this channel, but that's pretty good as well. Not every video needs to be 2 hours long. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye.